The next step for this book cover is to attach the liner leather. Now, accuracy is important here, so we'll do this in stages, and we'll start by prepping the liner leather. So for this first part, we will need a knife, our smaller radius, a quilting square, a pin, and our ruler. And I'm actually going to get a slightly bigger quilting square because the first step is to cut slits on these marks that we made earlier, outlining the spine hub material. And we're going to do this by lining up our square based on that center line, and then we can cut against our square. You only want to go as wide as those marks are, so be very careful here. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. So now that that's done, we'll go ahead and cut down this center line in order to make tabs on either side. You want to really make sure that your knife is sharp at this stage. You may want to break off the end and use a fresh one if you're using a blade similar to this one, but you need it to be very sharp when you're cutting this soft liner leather. And you want to be very careful at either end. If you didn't cut quite all the way through, that's okay. You would rather not cut all the way through than accidentally cut into this yap measurement part. So now that those tabs are cut out, we're going to want to cut a small triangle out of here. And we want to do this in order to allow some room right here to glue the end sheets on very close to our spine. So for this, I will measure about 3/8 of an inch from the slit right here and make a mark. And this does not have to be perfect, just pretty close. And then I will take the square and measure from the corner up to that mark we just made and cut that out. Be very careful here. I have had multiple times where I accidentally cut this way into the leather, and there's just not a whole lot of room for error there. And there we go, that's what one side should look like. And then you just repeat on the other. So one thing to note here is that if the two sides do not seem to line up quite perfectly, that is okay. They're going to be going on completely different sides of the book, so you won't even know that they're there. Now that that's done, we can move on to our corner radius. So again, you're going to want a very sharp knife here. One thing about this corner radius is you want it to be the smaller one. This is going to be very close to what the corners actually will look like on the book rebind. So for example, I used this corner radius for this rebind, and it's fairly close to being that size. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit bigger because you're doing foldovers over that, but whenever you're choosing your radius sizes, I would suggest you go with the smaller one first because that will be much closer to what the final product will look like. Holding pressure down so that it doesn't move, and we're going to do a few smaller cuts here. There we go. All right, so there is our liner pretty much prepared. There's one other thing that we need to do, and that is to mark the center line on the front on the edges. Now this mark will be covered up by the fold over, but we need it to align to the center line that we have on our cover. So for this, I'm doing a combination of two things. I'm trying to line it up with this, and I'm also just continuing this centered line here onto the edge. That way I can see it from the front. And we can bring in our cover because we are going to be focusing now on gluing the liner to the cover. For this process, we will need glue and a brush. This is that exact same PVA glue. Something else that may come in handy here is some Q-tips, and then you'll want something you can use to roll out and add some pressure to the glue. They do have dedicated rollers for this, and that is what I would recommend. But for me, I'm just going to be using a glass. Now, this is one that I picked out specifically because it does not have much of an angle, so it should still work fairly well. So one thing we want to do here is pick out an orientation for the liner. Because I'm not a machine, this will probably fit inside of the lines one way slightly better than the other. I think I am going to orient it this way, and I'm just going to put an arrow on either side. And honestly, the reason I'm doing it this way is because there is a bit of an imperfection in this cover leather right here. And I want that to be in the back of the book as opposed to in the front. But that's really all I have in terms of deciding factors here. Now, once the glue is down, we'll have a limited window to get everything perfect. And that can be very overwhelming. So I suggest doing a small section first. Now, there are plenty of ways that you can do this and approach that, but I am going to start by gluing a line that's about the size of the yap at the top here. And then I will make sure that the liner is snugged up to the top line, but the bottom most top line that we have, and making it straight across this whole thing. And I'm going to probably flip this around so that it's just a little bit closer to me so I can see what I'm doing. When you are gluing, you want to be very careful and try not to allow glue past the innermost line that you have, because anything outside of that is your fold over area. And once glue dries, it becomes very stiff, and that is not what you want on your fold overs. You want that to be very, very easy to move around. And if you get a little bit too close, just wipe it off with your finger. It may not be perfect. It may still get a little bit stiff. It's better than just leaving it to dry completely. And then this is the part where having the Q-tips comes in handy. The Q-tips can kind of help us to get the glue up to the line, but not really past the line. They're a little bit easier to control than the brush. And then you want to get right up to your craft text in this step as well. We'll take our liner, make sure that the arrows are facing the correct direction, and then just lay it down. And we want to line up the center marking that we have with the center line. And we want to kind of wiggle the leather up to the line everywhere so that it's very straight across. And once you have that fairly well done, we will take our makeshift roller and roll that out, adding just a little bit of pressure here. And then we can let that dry for a couple of minutes, just so that we do not have to worry about it moving once we go to glue the rest. All right, so that has dried for a couple of minutes, not too long. Now we can just flip up the liner and go ahead and apply glue. Spread out our glue, and we still want to be careful around the edges. I would recommend that you kind of stay away from the edges until you get everything spread out a little bit more. I put way too much glue on this. And you want to make sure that you get right up to the craft text here as well. Probably don't want to have that much on the craft text, but if you have some, that's okay. See this right here? That is exactly what you want to avoid. So I have done a very poor job of this. And actually what I'm going to do is wipe some of this excess glue off, really focus on cleaning it up right here. Now that you have this spread out a little bit better, at least, and focus on this a little bit more and getting it out to the very edges. And also make sure that you get right beneath your liner and where it sits now. And then I'm going to take my brush and try to get some excess off. And then we can use our Q-tip to get everything out to the edges. Now we can flop down our liner, and we want to aim to have our middle mark right there on that line. Then we can kind of massage everything up to the lines they're supposed to be on and try our best to clean off the ends. And we want to massage the bottom of this down so that it touches that line. All right, so I'm going to take this and try to clean off some of this glue that we have, but we need to also try our best to massage it so that everywhere is evenly spaced out. And there we go. It looks pretty good everywhere now, so I will just attempt to roll this, being careful about the glue getting everywhere because it is. See, I'm not doing a great job of demonstrating this because you're not supposed to have glue everywhere, but it's how it goes. So then what we can do is we can turn the whole thing over and go over it with our roller from the spine out, including the top and bottom. And there we go. If you want to, you can grab some water on the end of a paper towel and just kind of go over the ends and get some of that glue off. You want to do this while it's still somewhat wet so that you can kind of get that glue off. And then one thing that you can do is you can take your tool from doing the hubs that is used just as a general tool to push things down, and you can kind of go over this part. So now we will let this dry, and what I'm going to do is turn this over and stack a couple of books on it. We're going to stack on either side of the spine, and I will throw some weight on both of these. So once the glue dries, we can finish the book by doing the foldovers and the stitching. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.